We are going to be talking about a new topic. I love new topics. I know some of you were looking forward to a continuation of last time's meeting that we were here. We're going to work on that, John. Okay. I promise you. We're going to work on it. I promise you to be blessed with today's too. And the last 2 weeks that I've been studying this topic has completely just blown my mind. I've posted some little bit of nuggets and snippets on Facebook letting you guys know about what we're going to be talking about. But the things that I'm realizing in this Torah portion connecting with this week's events in Israel, I mean, I've got chills just thinking about it. Okay? How many of you are aware of what's going on in Israel right now? A few of you. Okay, so a few weeks ago, well, last week, there was a terrorist attack by 2 or 3 Muslims up on the Temple Mount where they murdered 2 Israeli police officers. Okay, there's never been a terrorist attack like this in recent years, the way that it's happened on the Temple Mount. If you go on to any Israeli newspaper online or any apps or anything like that, you good? As you can see the actual video of how these guys snuck weapons up onto the Temple Mount, inside the mosque up there, and how they come back down, they got back up, and so on and so forth. That was the first instance. Since that happened, the Israeli government has now implemented metal detectors for Muslims on the Temple Mount. They are the only individuals up until now that did not have to go through a metal detector. Now they're ticked. Now they're rioting. I've seen people say on the Jerusalem Post newspaper yesterday that the 3rd Intifada has already started. They're encouraging Muslims and Palestinians to rise up and to cause all kinds of chaos because they refuse to go through a metal detector. It's pretty ridiculous if you think about it. So things are actually changing on the Temple Mount. It's not like they're making it seem like it's all for the good, but it's really not all for the good at the moment. Israelis were allowed to go up onto the Temple Mount and pray, not in a manner in which most of them would like, but they were able to go up and not have the pressures of them constantly not being able to pray, because normally when you go up on the Temple Mount, how many have ever been on the Temple Mount? One of you. 2 of you. I highly encourage you, if you've not been to Israel, go. Go to Israel. It will change your life. When you go up on the Temple Mount, were you escorted? Yeah. I was escorted. When I went to the Temple Mount, they send you up there with about 4 to 5 Israeli police officers. And there's also, depending on who you are, there was a Muslim, or what they call the WAF police. Did you have any of those with you? Well, if they know that you're Jewish and that you're highly observant in the land of Israel, you're going to have a Muslim cop that's there with you also. This week, there was no Muslim police officers surrounding the Jewish people. So Jeremy, how many of you know who Jeremy Gimple is? He's a Jewish rabbi. You saw the video? He actually went up onto the Temple Mount, prayed, and he was so overwhelmed with the events of the week that he actually fell down on his knees and was praying. And as soon as they did that, the Israeli police had to basically escort him off. Because even though they say, look, you guys can pray with your hearts and stuff like that, keep your lips quiet because we don't want anything to go on. You can't bow down and do all this stuff. But the amount of things that they've been able to do on the Temple Mount just this week and last week, it's completely changing the demographics of Israel right now. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not one to predict any type of events. I like to watch the events to see what's happening so we can understand what is going to happen next. But there's things that are happening this week that could reshape everything over there. I don't know what's going to happen, but the amazing thing is that when you have a Torah portion and that Torah portion lines up with events, pay attention. I've said this for years. This week, there are things happening in Israel that are matching up with this Torah portion. One of the other events that happened last night, there was a family of 2 60-year-olds, a husband and wife, and they had a 40-year-old, nephew or somebody there, and another woman there that was 60 years old in their house, opening Shabbat traditionally in the land of Israel, in the West Bank, and a 19-year-old kid walked into their house and stabbed all 4 of them. You can see pictures of it all over Facebook, all over the Jerusalem Post. The two 60-year-olds and the 40-year-old died. The other 60-year-old lady is still in the hospital. Why does that have anything to do with this Torah portion? Well, these people are being called, and Abbas, who is the leading people with the Muslim or the Palestinian Authority, is they're encouraging all of these people to rise up and to cause all sorts of chaos. We're going to be talking about, and you read in this Torah portion, about the Avenger of Blood. There is blood being spilled all over the place right now over there. And when this type of stuff lines up with the Torah portion, there's something that Yahweh wants us to realize and to recognize. Okay? Even though we would love to see revenge, and I know most of us, if we're really honest, is we want to seek revenge on people. Maybe not to the extent of shedding their blood, but we've all had instances where people have hurt us in this life. You know, family members have done us wrong and all sorts of stuff like that, and we want to seek vengeance. Trust me, I get it. There's been quite a few people that I would not mind strangling in this life. But we can't do that, right? So we have to trust in who Yahweh is. So today, and I don't know, anybody recognize, what?
I said, is that a question? The way you asked that, it was you're looking for confirmation.
Does anybody recognize this symbol up here? Come on, young people.
I'm guessing
Looks
it's
like
the Avengers.
Iron Man or something.
Yeah, one person? Come on. There, oh, there, she shouted it out. There we go. Now, many of you know, as I incorporate a lot of comic book stuff in my teachings to, obviously, to reach young people. And plus, I like the movies. I like the Marvel movies. I was never really a big comic book guy or kid, but this generation is attached to comic book stuff like crazy. And so when I found out I was going to be teaching about the Avenger, I stole their symbol just to incorporate it. And really because Yahweh and Yeshua, they're the ultimate Avengers, right? Now, if you guys can't see this back there, I'm sorry. I'll email you the PowerPoint. But okay, so the Numbers 35 outline. Obviously, this is a double portion this week, right? We got Maseh and Matot. So we're finishing up the book of Numbers. We're going to be focusing on Numbers 35. Real quick, real briefly, if you have not watched the video that I did a few years ago on Numbers 33, it's out on my YouTube page, it's out on Facebook, so you guys can understand the significance of Numbers 33 being the military itinerary text, which is a legal document according to the ancient Near Eastern practice to show how Israel established themselves as a nation, right? And we've talked about this before because this is exactly what the Islamic State is trying to do, is they're documenting every single place that they conquer. They're removing their boundary stones. They're doing all these things and gathering all of this resources of the places they conquer, and they're documenting them so the world will recognize that their authority that they're trying to accomplish. Numbers 33 is showing you all the places in which Israel camped from the time that Yahweh took them out of the land of Egypt and moving them into the land to show that he has established them as a nation. It's a common text that kings would write in the ancient world to dictate all the places that they've been. It serves as a legal military campaign. And I go into all this stuff with that topic on the video. But like I said, today's chapter is going to be Numbers 35. And a real brief outline is Numbers 35, chapters 1 through 5. We talk about the 8 and 40 cities given to the Levites. Numbers 35, chapter 6 through 8, we talk about the cities of refuge, so we're going to talk about that. And then the bulk of the chapter, which is 9 through 34, we have the Blood Avenger. Now, the cities of refuge and the Blood Avenger are two topics that are interwoven amongst each other, and that's why we need to talk about both of them. And the reason why I've been so blown away about this topic is because, for those of you who don't know, we have two foundations at HFF. Those two foundations, number one, is your belief firmly footed in Yeshua, the divine Messiah. Amen. Number one. Number two is your identity as an Israelite. Okay, those are our two foundations. So whenever we come into this building and I'm presenting things to you guys, I want to make sure that those two foundations are in there. And I want to enhance my own belief in who Yeshua is. Not that I'm doubting, but we're always going to be learning, right? We're never going to get there. If you think you have arrived, you haven't. Trust me. So when I look at this Torah portion, and the reason why it's blowing my mind is I've been reading the Torah portion for 10 years. We've been doing this about 10 years, almost 10 years. I have never, ever seen the things that I'm about to show you. And it's mind-boggling how you could read something over and over and over and over and over and over and over 10 times. And granted, I probably read it more than 10 times because of other studies and stuff like that. But when you see things and Yahweh says, okay, you're not ready this year, you're not ready this year, you're not ready this year, you're not ready this year. And then you start seeing things, it makes you wonder what's happening. It is. So without further ado, let's look at who exactly the Avenger actually is, okay? Now I have multiple articles. Oh, I even brought them to show you. Normally I forget this part. So you guys could come and look at these, or I can email them to you. The multiple resources that we're using. This one is called Killer on the Run. And it is by Rav Zivi Shimon, which is rabbinical commentary, believe it or not. Blood, Revenge in Arabia and Israel by Walter M. Patton. This one is just the Anchor Bible Dictionary. I use it every single time that we put teachings together. And this one is called Homicide in the Biblical World by Pamela Barmash. And this is like a 400-page book. And I only printed off some of it. But if you guys want these resources, you can come up and look at them, or I can email them to you. That way you have them. But most of this information this week is coming from those articles and obviously scriptures. So, the Avenger. God commands the Israelites to designate cities of refuge. This is basically just a sum up of this chapter of Numbers 35. Of refuge where accidental killers may seek protection from the avenger of the deceased's blood. The killer remains in the city of refuge until he stands trial. If the judge conclude that the killing was unintentional, a consequence of carelessness, and not premeditated, then the killer is returned to the city of refuge where he must remain till the death of the high priest. There he lives safely out of the reach of the avenger and the violence is terminated. If, however, the killer is found guilty of murder, he is handed over to the avenger and put to death. Now, so basically what happens is you have somebody in the ancient world, just get this next one ready. In the ancient world that would kill somebody, whether it was, and this chapter goes into whether they kill somebody with a baseball bat, an axe. All these, it's not really a baseball bat, but they use all these different things in there to show what happens if they kill them with this, or if it was intentional, if it was non-intentional. So what happens when you would kill somebody is now you have a choice to go to 6 cities. And I'm going to show you the cities. There were 6 on the west side of the Jordan, 6 on the east side of the Jordan. Okay? That person has to wait there. 3 and 3. That person has to wait there until the case is investigated and determine whether or not it was premeditated murder or if it was accidental, right? And as soon as that happens, there's a trial, there's witnesses, and so on and so forth, and that dictates whether or not the person has to stay in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest, or if they murdered them. You're talking about manslaughter versus murder at this point, right? So if you murder them, you're put to death automatically, because they have to purge that from the purity of the camp, right? So the murderer is dealt with right away. But the one who commits manslaughter, because they still shed blood, they have to stay in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. Now we're going to get into some of these technicalities of this. But we got to look at some definitions. So who is the Avenger? He is referred to in Hebrew as the Goel. How many know the term Goel? One person. Cheryl, it's me and you right now. Interestingly, this very same word is used in relation to several other commandments. The Goel receives money owed to a dead family member on behalf of the family. Numbers 5:8. He buys a family member out of slavery brought on by poverty and buys property that has passed out of the family under similar conditions. According to the book of Ruth, his responsibilities also include marrying the widow of a childless relative in order to perpetuate his name, which basically, you guys, is what the whole book of Ruth is about, right? So the Goel, also known as the Goel Hadam, is a Hebrew term which comes from the word legol, to redeem. hence meaning redeemer, which in the Hebrew Bible and the rabbinical tradition denotes a person who, as the nearest relative of another, is charged with the duty of restoring the rights of another and avenging his wrongs. When Goel is used in context involving revenge or wrongful death, the English language translations of the Bible generally refer to a Goel as an avenger of blood. So you have this word avenger is translated as redeemer in the Old Testament 18 times and 50 times as the word redeem. The redeemer for one is also the avenger for others. So you have one of those play on word type of things, right? So you're going to see that the word that is used for avenger in this chapter is translated from the Hebrew word goel, and it's translated as avenger, and it's translated as redeemer or to redeem. Right there, that should be sending off all sorts of questions that are going on in your brain. Because that was one of the first things I saw a few weeks ago that was like, wow, there's a bigger connection here. Okay? My computer is very slow today for some reason. So all these instances relate to a loss suffered by the family. Thus, we may conclude that the Goel is the next of kin selected by the family to deal with a loss suffered by that family. This may shed light on the conceived role of the Avenger of Blood, since the Goel is not viewed as engaging in revenge, but rather in redemption of a family loss. A family member was killed, and the Goel seeks to rectify this loss. In so doing, he represents the deceased and his family. Now, so basically, what are they saying here? When you would have somebody who was murdered, right? And I've seen some commentaries this week who have thought that there has been basically one avenger set in the time of Israel for everybody, which I don't see that has any evidence whatsoever. Because if you notice the context and you notice the history and the definition of the avenger and who it's supposed to be, is it's supposed to be the next of kin, right? So somebody is murdered. And this is why we don't understand these type of things, because we don't live in this type of society anymore. Sometimes people take revenge, right? Like if somebody would, heaven forbid, come after my wife or children, I'm going to seek revenge before anybody else does. It's probably not the right thing to do because of the society we live in, but if it was ancient Israel, I would be the one to avenge them, right? This is what would happen, is it was the next of kin. This is very important just to know that it was the next of kin who was supposed to avenge those. I really do not know why this thing is so stinking slow. Yeah, that's the graphics. See, I try to put these fancy animations up here for you guys, and it just slows everything down. So the Avenger, the Hebrew Goel, is the term translated also kinsman, redeemer in the book of Ruth. The Avenger of Blood is a kinsman who redeems the lost life of a relative by exacting the life of the murderer. The responsibility to carry out this judgment falls to the nearest living relative, the father, the eldest brother, and on down the line. The Avenger of Blood in ancient Israel, the nearest male relative, was responsible for protecting the property, liberty, and prosperity of the next of kin, in addition to protecting their lives throughout the avenging of blood. Now this is where I want you to start to see that this is a foreshadowing of Yeshua the Messiah, okay? And I'm going to drop a truth bomb on you right now just so you can make a real quick connection. Where's Yeshua murdered? If you think about it, he was murdered. Yes, it was planned that way, right? Yeshua was murdered by the religious elite of the time. Did Yahweh avenge his death? Is he the next in kin to be able to avenge his death? What happened in Israel 40 years later? The temple was destroyed and Jerusalem was sacked. This is one of those things that I've never saw before, because the Torah portion, you have to look at that and say, what is the connection to the Messiah? what is the connection of what we're supposed to be realizing here? Because everything points to Yeshua. I don't care what people say. Before you make a rash decision about who Yeshua is, if you don't investigate every single point, it took me 10 years just to realize that one fact that I just told you. That Yahweh is the one who avenges Yeshua's death, right? Or his blood. Because blood is required of those who take the blood. That's why in the first instance of the avenger, or somebody being exiled to a city, was during Cain and Abel, right? What did Yahweh do to Abel? Or Cain? Is he sends him out and says that if anybody avenges his blood, that he's coming after them. Right? So the nearest living relative is the father, eldest brother, and on down the line. All right, the 6 cities of refuge. You have the Golan, Ramoth, and Bosor, all on the east side of the Jordan. Kadesh, Shechem, and Hebron on the western side. Pretty self-explanatory. So you have three on the east side, 3 on the west side, right? Why is this so significant? Well, we have to look at the concepts that are attached to the distinctions between the Torah cities of refuge and those in the ancient Near East. So the first striking difference, now most of you who know me by now, is that when I present ancient Near Eastern stuff, I tell you time and time and time again, is that if you don't see a distinction, put it up on the shelf and come back to it another time. There's always going to be a distinction between what Yahweh does and what the pagan nations do, always. Right? So the distinction with the cities of refuge back then, some people actually believe that the ancient Near East didn't even have any cities of refuge and that Israel was the first one. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I found evidence that proves otherwise. It's because also in the ancient world, the temple cities, wherever they had a temple, that was known as a sanctuary city. Right? They were safe for everything there. I mean, that's why we've seen certain people in Scripture in 2 Samuel and Kings go and grab the horns of the altar, right, thinking it's a sanctuary. And Yahweh says, you are not going to grab the horns of the altar. I mean, that's automatic death for you right there. So, the first striking difference between Torah law and the ancient Near Eastern law as far as cities of refuge. According to Torah law, the city of refuge is part of the judicial process. It is not an asylum from the law. It is merely a shelter from the avenger. The only purpose for the city of refuge is an asylum for that avenger who's coming after you in order to protect you, so that that avenger, in the heat of all the events that happen with his family member being murdered, he doesn't catch you and murder you right away without going to trial to determine whether or not it was manslaughter versus murder. In contrast to the idolatrous cities of refuge, which was beyond the pale of the judges, the Israelite court fetches the killer from the cities of refuge. When a man schemes against another and kills him treacherously, you shall take him from my very altar to be put to death, in Exodus 21:14. God's altar will not be made into a haven for criminals. The second distinction is the demand that the killer be judged by an impartial court. According to idolatrous practice, the avenger had free rein to avenge the blood of his relative. The Torah took the decision of the guilt or innocence of the manslayer out of the hands of the avenger and assigned it to an impartial tribunal. Torah law requires that the killer stand trial before facing the avenger. Only if he is found guilty of murder, he is handed over to the avenger. So see, in the ancient world, you killed somebody, there was no court whatsoever. They just took you out. But I'm also going to show you that they had some very messed up ways of handling somebody on the opposite end of the spectrum. So the third fundamental difference is that the Torah clearly distinguishes between the willful and the unintentional killer. The avenger may not kill the unwitting killer residing in a city of refuge. However, the murderer is handed over to the avenger. Thus, Torah law limits the action of the avenger to the willful murderer, but at the same time legally invests him with the role of carrying out the death penalty of he who is found guilty of murder. Now, there's some interesting things that happen within the Middle Assyrian laws and the Mesopotamian laws about they wrote these laws in order to justify basically not killing somebody that was a murderer, but taking their inheritance. by gaining more honor and more wealth for themselves, they just let the killer go and they just take their inheritance. It's just very interesting to me because, well, I'll tell you in a second. So these are a few of the Assyrian laws that I have found this week that are in some of these articles. And this Mala A10 reserves the right of the claimant from the victim's family to choose between killing the slayer or forcing him to pay. If either a man or a woman enters another man's house and kills either a man or a woman, they shall hand over the killers to the head of the household. If he chooses, he shall kill them, or if he chooses to come to an accommodation, he shall take their property. And if there's nothing of value to give from the house of the killer, either a son or a daughter. Why does it say that? Well, in the ancient world, everything was based off your inheritance, your family name. So if they didn't have any property at that time that was worth anything, so the next best thing to do is to take the people that you were going to give all your stuff to, because then they become yours and all their stuff becomes yours. So instead of having equity and dealing with equity within their own kingdoms, it was all about just taking the inheritance and gaining more honor and more wealth for themselves. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense. There's no equity there. Another law, if a man who has not yet received his share of the inheritance takes a life, they shall hand him over to the next of kin. Should the next of kin so choose, he shall kill him, or if he chooses to come to accommodation, then he shall take his share of the inheritance. The role of the claimant from the victim's family here is to decide on the penalty. In general, it appears families had the right to either execution or compensation. So essentially, you guys, the Mesopotamian nations, they didn't want anything to do with equity, right? It was all about taking their people's inheritance and oppressing people. And if they didn't have an inheritance, then they took the son or the daughter. Now let me ask you a question. Does not this sound exactly like what Hasatan's been trying to do to Yahweh's people since the beginning of time? But think about it. Is if he can convince every single person on this planet, which obviously he's not going to, but as many as he possibly can, to walk out this life of sin, walk out this life of basically murdering, right? He's essentially trying to get you to give up your own inheritance, because everything is attached to inheritance. We have to look at this from the bigger picture of what is happening. Why is this even an issue? Why is this such an issue right now in the Torah portion? Because there's something bigger there that we're supposed to recognize, just like all the other Torah portions. And you guys know I'm not this warm, spiritually fuzzy type of guy to where I like to have concrete evidence for a lot of stuff. But if we don't recognize that there's a bigger plan here, and that Hasatan is basically trying to get every single one of us to give up our inheritance and to live this life of sin, and ultimately murdering ourselves or giving up our own life to sin and being separated from the Creator for all eternity, and how this is connected to Yeshua being the Avenger. And I'm going to show you there's two roles that Yeshua is playing in this Torah portion. And I'm going to show you them. So the Biblical Encyclopedia on Blood Revenge. Of all other nations, the Greeks and the Romans alone seem to have possessed cities of refuge, in which Daphne, near Antioch, seems to have been one of the most prominent, and to have served as a refuge even for willful murderers. The laws and customs of ancient Greeks in cases of murder may be gathered from the principle laid down by Plato on heads, since, according to tradition, the murdered person is greatly irritated against the murderer during the first few months after the perpetration of the deed. The murderer ought therefore to inflict a punishment upon himself by exiling himself from his country for a whole year. And if the murdered be a foreigner, by keeping away from his country. If the homicide subjects himself to such a punishment, it is but fair that the nearest relative should be appeased and grant pardon. But in case he does not submit to that punishment, or dares even to enter the temple while the guilt of the blood is still upon his hands, the avenger shall arraign him before the bar of justice, where he is to be punished on the infliction of double fine. But in the case of the avenger neglects to proceed against him, the guilt passes over to him, the avenger. Read this again. I'm not going to read again. What this is saying is if somebody in the Greek, in the Roman mindset, right? Now, this is first century times. If the murderer goes off and he finds a sanctuary city, he's found guilty, and the one who is the next of kin, who is the avenger, does not take vengeance, then that person becomes the one who has to take on the responsibility and the guiltiness of the one who was murdered, or the murderer himself. What does all that mean? Okay, what did Yeshua do on the stake? Did he bear the penalty and all of the guilt and all the shame and all the stuff for you and I? Did he avenge the blood of us when we were the ones who were murdering and constantly doing all the same things? As he could have wiped us all out, there could have been no plan of salvation for all of us, right? So by Yahweh not avenging, because what he does with Israel, Israel screws up, they commit idolatry, they commit murder, they commit all these things, he sends them into the exile. But he always had a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, correct? So even though the descendants of Israel continue to do all these things down the line, all the way down to you and I, where he should have wiped this all out by avenging the blood, by sending Yeshua, by him sending Yeshua, Yeshua said, I'm not going to avenge that. I'm going to take it upon all myself, because then I become guilty. I take on the guilt. I take on the shame. I take on all those things. Are you seeing this? Does this make sense now? This is how the Greeks and the Romans thought in the first century. It's crazy. Never saw this before. But in the case the avenger neglects to proceed against him, those who are guilty, the guilt passes over to him, the avenger. And anyone may take him before the judge, who passes on him the sentence of banishment for 5 years. So they had a banishment for 5 years against the avenger that didn't avenge the blood of the people.
So the murderer would only have to...
He'd only have to be banished for 5 years.
Well, he only just said that he banished for 1 year, right?
No, it was 5.
The original murderer
Oh, the original murderer.
was to serve 1 year out of the country. But with the avenger, is that right?
Are you talking about it in the Torah portion?
No, just what you had up there. And what the Romans,
Oh,
they were only supposed to, he was only supposed to
serve a year. I'll have to go back. We'll have to go back and look. So Yeshua the Avenger bore the penalty due us. For this is favor. Because of conscience toward Elohim, anyone bears up under grief, suffering unrighteously, for what credit is there in enduring a beating when you sin? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure, this finds favor with Elohim. For to this you were called, because Messiah also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who being reviled did not revile, in return suffering, did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously, who himself bore our sins in his body on the timber, so that we, having died to sins, might live unto righteousness, by whose stripes you are healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but have now returned to the shepherd and the overseer of your lives. So this shows how Yeshua took on that idea of being basically a guilty avenger, of not being the one who avenged those people that he should have. Now, the death of the high priest. This is where this is going to get interesting. This is where we're going to see that the death of the high priest is going to lead us into showing one of the roles that Yeshua is portraying in this Torah portion. Okay? So the question is, the exile of the unintentional killer is not eternal. Scripture states that he must remain in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. Why should the length of the killer's tarriance in the city of refuge be determined by the high priest's lifespan? This is part of this week's Torah portion. So the guy is convicted of only manslaughter. You stay in that city and you don't leave. The only time you get to leave is at the death of the high priest. Anybody got an answer for this?
Well, the land is defiled by the blood of the person who was killed. So something has to be used to atone for that blood. Somebody has to die.
Somebody's got to die. Because blood's been shed, whether it's accidental or willful. Somebody's got to die. And if he's guilty of manslaughter, obviously he gets to live. But if he was guilty of murder, they killed him, so that blood that was shed on him equivocates to the blood that that person murdered. But why the high priest? Made me wonder. I'm going to show you why. Numbers 35, 25 through 8. Let's look at the verses real quick. And the congregation shall rescue the one who killed someone from the hand of the Avenger of Blood, and the congregation shall return him to the city of refuge where he had fled. And he shall remain there until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the Kodesh oil. But if the one who killed someone at any time goes outside the limits of the city of refuge where he fled, and the Avenger of Blood finds him outside the limits of his city of refuge, and the Avenger of Blood kills him who killed someone, he is not guilty of blood, because he should have remained in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. But after the death of the high priest, he who killed someone is to return to the land of his possession. So after the death of the high priest, right, he gets to basically have his inheritance back. Remember, this is all about inheritance. Whether we're talking physical inheritance with the land, or we're looking at the bigger picture, this is talking about our inheritance of eternal life, of our eternal inheritance. It's all attached to that. So, I normally don't incorporate a lot of rabbinical type of commentary in my stuff, only because some of it's, well, a lot of it's pretty skeptical for me, right? I like learning a lot about that kind of stuff and trying to determine where they are at on certain things, but I don't usually incorporate a lot of it. But when you look at some of the stuff that they're talking about the high priest, and you connect it to this Torah portion, it gives me a better understanding of why Yeshua is who he is. So he who kills a human being with no atonement had no atonement until the Torah established atonement through the death of the high priest, as is written in Numbers 35 we just read. There he shall remain until the death of the high priest. Basically in the Jerusalem Talmud, they're just quoting the exact same thing that we just read. Right? Okay. According to our sages, the death of the high priest is not simply a calendarical, I have a hard time with this word. Can anybody say calendrical designation? It's basically saying it's not just an event in time that's marked on the calendar. It provides atonement for the unintentional killing of human beings and consequently releases the unintentional killer from the city of refuge. This approach is further elaborated by Shaddal, where he says that the priest atoned for unintentional sins through the offerings of sacrifices. The high priest atones for even more, this being the reason for his functions on Yom Kippur. And the death of the high priest is the highest form of atonement, which atones for unintentional manslaughter, the severest of unintentional sins. So in their mindset, the high priest is able to atone through his death for the unintentional sin of manslaughter, which is the shedding of blood. Right? Pointing in connections together yet? Maimonides says that the Goel must be the nearest heir and cannot enter upon his inheritance until he has avenged his slain relative. Declining to avenge, he must himself be executed by judicial authority. This is going back to the same stuff with Yeshua we just talked about. The Old Testament itself knows no penalty for refusal to avenge. There would possibly be much the same kind of shame put upon a Goel who refused to avenge blood as upon a brother-in-law who refused to marry his brother's widow. So this is the same stuff that's translated as the Avenger, same stuff that's translated as the Redeemer, the Goel, so on and so forth. So what are the two roles that Yeshua plays in this Torah portion? The high priest who atones for those guilty of unintentional manslaughter are in exile until his death. Now we've talked about this before, right? Yeshua dies on the stake. He resurrects 3 days later. What does that mean? That means that if you know who he is, he's conquered death, which he's going to avenge the death of his people that will be continually murdered throughout the thousands of years. But as soon as he resurrects, that shows you right then and there, if you put your faith in him as the Mashiach, that you get your inheritance back. But you're still in exile, right? But in reality, and spiritually, you've already been given back your inheritance as long as you continue down this path of faith in Him and all these things that we're supposed to do. It's about having your inheritance back. As soon as His blood was shed, and He took that guilt upon Himself and resurrects, your inheritance is there. Remember, everything is about inheritance. The second role, the Avenger of Blood that Yahweh sends to avenge His people. See, people don't understand. Yeshua is coming back. Amen?
Amen.
He's not coming back on a donkey this time. Bless you. Remember, He's coming back at a time after where there's going to be great tribulation upon the earth, and many, many, many of Yahweh's people are going to die. Maybe even you and I. I'm not wishing that on you. I'm just saying it may be a fact. It may not be. I pray that it's not. But I'm going to show you verses in the book of Revelation, if you don't already know them, where there's people asking, when are you going to avenge the blood of your people?
When the rest of your brothers and sisters die.
Yep. The two roles that Yeshua is playing in this Torah portion is the high priest, and I'm going to show you verses in Hebrews, and He's playing the avenger that Yahweh is going to send to avenge His people. If you don't see Yeshua in the Torah portion, you got problems. I think I'm getting pretty blunt over the years, and I'm sorry if it seems that way, but I don't know. Hebrews 2:17 and 18. So in every way He had to be made like His brothers in order to become a compassionate and trustworthy high priest in matters related to Elohim, to make atonement for the sins of the people. For in what He had suffered Himself being tried, He is able to help those who are tried. Now see, this is why, you guys, we don't understand temple service. How are we ever going to understand anything? You cannot do away with understanding the temple in order to understand anything about Scripture. If the people of the earthly temple understood that the high priest would atone for those sins of those that committed manslaughter or the shedding of blood, don't you think when they wrote Hebrews, this all is going to start to make sense to a lot of people? You can't do away with the temple service. What happened to my screen? You're supposed to tell me when it's blank. Hebrews 5 through 10. So also the Messiah did not extol Himself to become high priest, but it was He who said to Him, "You are my Son, today I have brought you forth." As He also says in another place, "You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek." And try to help me stay focused right there. This is talking about a specific order of a priesthood in the heavenly temple. Okay? Who in the days of His flesh, when He had offered up prayers and petitions and strong crying and tears to Him who was able to save him from death, and was heard because of His reverent fear. Though being a son, He learned obedience by what He suffered, and having been perfected, He became the causer of everlasting deliverance to all those obeying Him. Having been designated by Elohim a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. It shows that Yeshua has the power, He has the honor, He's been given the role to atone for our sins as the high priest, because He's coming from a priesthood that is not of the earthly realm. I had to put in one Avenger quote in there. Huh? Captain America is an Avenger, Dylan. Okay. And Captain America said one time that there's only one God. Amen. And I put something in there from Martin Luther because I thought that the quote was good. Not necessarily I agree with Martin Luther, so don't walk out here. Come on, people. But he said that God alone is the Avenger. And that's one thing that I think that we do need to recognize, is that even though we're talking about all these things, we have to understand that Yeshua is being sent. Obviously, there's a divine aspect of that. But we have to understand the roles of the Father, the roles of the Son, and ultimately everything that the Son does is because He's sent by the Father, correct? So we have to recognize that not only is Yeshua going to be the literal, physical avenger of His people at the end of the tribulation, but Yahweh is ultimately the divine avenger. Because if you look at the book, when you read the book of Isaiah now, and hopefully you guys are going to look at this, where it talks about Him being divine avenger is it's going to completely change your mindset on what those verses are talking about. The book of Isaiah is filled with this language. So from the idea of the human Goel, or the Redeemer, as a redeemer of his kinsmen in their troubles, there are to be found many allusions to Yahweh as the divine Goel, redeeming his people from their woes, and of the people themselves becoming the redeemed ones of Yahweh. The reference to God as the Goel and as the one who would redeem his people was applicable to the relationship between Yahweh and Israel in the exilic period, when the people actually looked to their God to restore their land for them, as the impoverished individual looked to his kinsmen to secure a restoration of his testimony. Hence, of 33 passages in which the Goel, as a noun or a verb, is applied to God, 19 occur in the exilic and post-exilic sections of Isaiah, the preacher par excellence of restoration. And the reason why that is emphasizing the fact that they would only, it was 18 or 19 times while they were in exile, is because it was all about them gaining back their inheritance. And they could not do that on their own. You and I cannot do that on their own. So if we recognize while we're still in exile that you and I cannot just, and I know some people want to move to Israel. Trust me, I want to move to Israel. I want to take my family to Israel. And even though that we spiritually have been given our inheritance back, you can't just go over there and grab a chunk of land and live there. They don't want us. Not yet. But while we're here in exile, if we recognize that Yahweh and Yeshua are those divine Goels, those divine redeemers, those are the ones that are going to restore our inheritance back, and you just wait, bide your time, then what's the issue? We got lots of work here. I see lots of empty seats here. I say this a lot now, but there's work. We got work to do. There's lots of people don't know that they can have their inheritance back. There's lots of people who don't even know that they're still in exile. So the divine avenger, Psalms 94, 1 through 7. And Yahweh El of vengeance, O El of vengeance, shine forth. Raise yourself up, O judge of the earth, and render punishment to the proud. Yahweh, how long are the wrong? How long are the wrong going to exalt? They pour forth words, they speak arrogantly. All the workers of wickedness boast in themselves. They crush your people, O Yahweh, and they afflict your inheritance. They slay the widow and the stranger, the murderer, and murder the fatherless. Yet they say, Yah does not see, and the Elohim of Yaakov pays no heed. Do you see why I said earlier today that this stuff is actually in the news today? You go on the Israel news right now. Go on Facebook. You're going to see pictures of everything that's happened in Israel, especially what happened last night. It's all over the place. People are being murdered. There's blood being shed. And the people of Israel are trusting and hoping that Yahweh is going to avenge the blood of his people, which we know that he is. If we don't believe that Yahweh is going to avenge the blood of his people, like we read in these verses, then what are we doing? Everything that's going on over there, when it lines up with the Torah portion, it's time for people to rise up and to recognize that he's trying to teach us something. And there's lots of blood being shed, and I don't know, I told you earlier, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't have any idea what's going to happen next. But all I know is that Yahweh says that he's going to avenge their blood. And those people don't get to, mind you, the cities of refuge and everything you read in Numbers 35, those are set up for people that are walking in covenant, actually. I don't know necessarily that Yahweh's saying somebody who comes into your land, which you were supposed to get rid of a long time ago, which, by the way, in this Torah portion it says to get rid of these people or else they will become a what?
Thorn in your side.
Do those people deserve to go to a city of refuge? They don't even want to make it out of the place in which they're trying to blow up or murder people in. They don't deserve no city of refuge. So in a way, is Yahweh avenging their death? To a certain extent. Until he comes back and he's going to weed all of them people out. Isaiah 59. What time is it? Wow, we're doing really good. And the truth is lacking, and whoever turns away from evil makes himself a prey, and Yahweh saw, and it displeased him that there was no right ruling. And he saw that there was no man, and was astonished that there was no intercessor. So his own arm saved for him, and his righteousness upheld him. And he put on righteousness as a breastplate, and a helmet of deliverance on his head. And he put on garments of vengeance for clothing, and wrapped himself with ardor or honor as a mantle. According to their deeds, so he repays. Wrath to his adversaries, recompense to his enemies. He repays recompense to the coastlands. This tells you that he's going to avenge. And he was looking for Israel to be able to do these things during these times, but they didn't do it. Joel chapter 3. Proclaim this among the Gentiles, prepare for battle, wake up with the mighty men. Let all the men of battle draw near and let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears, and let them say, I am strong. Hasten and come, all you Gentiles, and gather together all around. O Yahweh, let your mighty men come down here. Let the Gentiles be aroused and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. For there I shall sit to judge all the Gentiles on every side. Put in the sickle, for the harvest has grown ripe. Come, go down, for the winepress is filled. The vats overflow, for their evil is great. Crowds in the valley of decision, for the day of Yahweh is near in the valley of decision. Sun and moon shall become dark, and stars will draw their brightness. And Yahweh shall roar from Zion and give forth his voice from Jerusalem. And the heavens and earth shall shake, but Yahweh shall be a refuge for his people, and a stronghold for the children of Israel. Now, we read these chapters all the time, and basically just want to talk about this sun and the stars and the signs and stuff like that, but not recognizing that this is talking about Yahweh avenging his own people, and in the end of days. And who's he going to send to do that? He's going to send Yeshua. Then you shall know that I am Yahweh your Elohim, dwelling in Zion, my Kodesh mountain, and Jerusalem shall be Kodesh. The foreigner shall not pass through her again. And it shall be that day that the mountains drip with new wine, and the hills flow with milk. And all the streams of Judah shall be flooded with water, and a fountain flow from the house of Yahweh, and water the Wadi Shittim. Mitzrayim shall become a ruin, and Edom a ruin, a wilderness, because of the violence done to the people of Yehudah, whose innocent blood they shed in their land. But Yehudah shall dwell forever in Jerusalem to all generations, and I shall avenge their blood, which I have not avenged, and Yahweh shall be dwelling in Zion. So we got to recognize that Yahweh says that he is going to avenge his people, no matter what. No matter what we're seeing on the news this week, no matter what happens in the future, no what happens to you and I, is Yeshua is going to come and he's going to avenge the blood of his people. I hope this is making sense. Seeing the connections with Yeshua being the high priest in this portion, Yeshua being the Avenger of Blood, is just mind-blowing to me, because it should solidify even more so who he is. We don't recognize the divine attributes of Yeshua, and if you think that you can avenge and take care of everything on your own, we got to talk. I don't understand why people have so many issues with who Yeshua is. It makes no sense. You cannot take care of sin on your own. You can't atone for yourself. Only he can do it. I am the door. Whoever enters through me, he shall be saved, and shall go in and shall go out and find pasture. The thief does not come except to steal, to slaughter, and to destroy. I have come that they may possess life, that they might possess it beyond measure. So I told you earlier about the bigger picture. Yeshua, yes, he's doing all these things for us, but there's a bigger battle that's been going on for 6,000 years, right? It has to be dealt with. This is why he is going to be the avenger. The Hasatan's he's got another play coming, where he's going to try to come after as many people as he possibly can. And as soon as he does that, and he ends up murdering a lot of Yahweh's people, it's up to Yeshua to avenge that blood. And when he comes next time, I told you, he's not coming on a donkey this time. The avenger in biblical text is part of a greater battle between Adonai and the adversary, due to the enemy seeks to steal, kill, and destroy. the human race in an attempt to ultimately steal our inheritance. If you don't understand that everything that we do from this point forth has to do with an inheritance on some level, then I'm not doing that very much good of a job. Remember, the Avenger of Blood in ancient Israel, the nearest male relative responsible for protecting the property, liberty, and posterity of his next of kin, in addition to protecting their lives through the avenging of blood. We know that this is Yeshua. We have to rely on him because if we're ultimately his bride and Hasatan is coming to murder his bride, he is going to seek vengeance. We're almost done. Hence, in the event of a depletion of the family by a loss of blood, the loss of life, the Goel had the responsibility of securing to the family an equivalent of that loss by either blood or by an agreed payment for its value. His mission was not vengeance, but equity. He was not an avenger, but a redeemer, a restorer, a balancer. And if you have the book, The Blood Covenant by Henry Trumbull, that's where that I think that's where that quote comes from, or I have another one coming. That's from him. But it's to show you that the avenger was not to be a person that all he did was just seek vengeance. It was about equity for that person that their life was taken. He was to be a redeemer, a Goel, one who brought forth that person's family line or the next of kin, gave them back their inheritance, and set them back on the right path. This is exactly what Yeshua came to do. And if you look at all these roles that he's playing, if he's coming back as the Avenger of Blood, Yahweh's kingdom is all about equity. Equity, the opportunity for salvation for every single person on this planet. And he's got to provide that equity for everybody, or else he's not a just God. There has to be equity. You think the people of Islam want equity? If you don't believe that way, you're an infidel. They kill you. That's it. The only way you get to live is if you pay a tax to them. You know that, right? Payment. They want payment. And then you got to live under the thumb of all the laws in which they tell you have to live anyway. That is not equity. His mission was not a vengeance, but equity. He was not an avenger, but a redeemer, a restorer, a balancer. And that was from Henry Trumbull. And you can get that book for free online. Come on, computer. And I want to give you guys more verses here before we close. That way you have them. If this thing will work. There we go. 2 Thessalonians 1, 3 through 12. We ought to give thanks to Elohim always for you, brothers, as it is proper, because your belief grows exceedingly. And the love every one of you has for each other is increasing. I really hope that in this day and age, our love for one another is increasing. I don't always feel that way. I feel like we're actually heading in the opposite direction at times. And hopefully that's going to change. So that we ourselves boast of you among the assemblies of Elohim for your endurance and belief in all your persecutions and afflictions which you are bearing. Clear evidence of the righteous judgment of Elohim in order for you to be counted worthy of the reign of God, for which you also suffer. Maybe that's why our love is not, because we don't really suffer. I think we pretty much live like kings and queens these days. Since Elohim shall rightly repay with affliction those who afflict you, and to give you who are afflicted rest with us when the Master Yeshua is revealed from heaven with his mighty messengers, in flaming fire taking vengeance on those who do not know Elohim and on those who do not obey the good news of our Master Yeshua the Messiah. This is why I want you guys to be able to continue to trust in who he is. I know sometimes it looks bad. I know sometimes you see the stuff that's happening this week and we're wondering where he's at, and we go through things in our lives. And I've got a moment in my own life, bless you, that my wife said a few years ago, when she lost her dad, and just asking, where is he? Where is he? When is he coming back? Sometimes we don't know. Actually, most of the time we don't know. I mean, we think he's coming like tomorrow, or we're thinking, wow, he should have been here like 3 weeks ago, or he should have been back 6 years ago. But the goal is to continue to trust in who he is and knowing that he's coming back. And he's going to avenge us. He's going to avenge all the wrongs that are happening to Israel's people, to Yahweh's people. And I know that doesn't make it any better at times, but we have to trust in knowing that he's coming back. Revelation 6:10. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Yahweh, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging your blood on those who dwell on the earth? Revelation 19:2, because his judgments are true and righteous, for he has judged the great harlot who is corrupting the earth with her immorality, and he has avenged the blood of his bondservants on her. The book of Revelation should show you that he is that avenger and he's coming back. And one more section of verses. Maybe. I don't understand what's going on with this thing. There we go. Hebrews 10:28 through 39. Anyone who has disregarded the Torah of Moshe dies without compassion on the witness of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much worse punishment do you think shall he deserve who has trampled the Son of Elohim underfoot, counted the blood of the covenant by which he was set apart as common, and insulted the Spirit of favor? For we know him who has said, Vengeance is mine, I shall repay, says Yahweh. And again, Yahweh shall judge his people. It is fearsome to fall into the hands of the living Elohim, but remember the former days when after you were enlightened, you endured a great struggle with sufferings. On the one hand, you were exposed to reproaches and pressures, and on the other hand, you became sharers with those who were so treated. For you sympathized with me in my chains, and you accepted with the joy of the seizure of your possessions, knowing that you have a better and a lasting possession for yourselves in the heavens. Do not then lose your boldness, which has great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the desire of Elohim, you receive the promise. For yet a little while he who is coming shall come and shall not delay. But the righteous shall live by belief, but if anyone draws back, my being has no pleasure in him. We are not of those who draw back to destruction, but of belief to the preservation of life. As you go forth, walking this life out, knowing, trusting in who he is. No matter what we see in the news, no matter what happens to us in the future, whether it's in our personal lives, it's going to be on a broader scale, as Yahweh's people, we've got to maintain that type of trust. Because you just saw what it says. You know what he's talking about when it tramples the blood? This goes back to temple service, you guys. If you don't understand the blood functionality in the temple, and if you trample that blood, what he's saying there, real brief example for those of you who have not been here before, the blood functionality in the temple was to wipe away the stain of the sin in which we cause in the earthly realm. So you have realms of impurity, right? Or realms of purity. When a certain type of sin was committed, there was an after effect that caused a stain onto a specific temple or a specific altar in the temple, depending on what it was. That was the function of the blood. It acts as a detergent. If you say that that blood isn't sufficient enough and I can just take care of it myself, let me go get some gain and waltz right up to the altar horns and start scrubbing it off. It doesn't work that way. Number one, because you don't see the stain in which you caused on those temple, or I keep saying temple, on those altars. You don't see the stain, but Yahweh sees it. Okay? And if the earthly temple was created in the pattern of the what? Then that means that there's something we're supposed to recognize when he sends his son in order to atone for our sins that we cause in the heavenly realm. So if Yeshua, who is the divine Son of God, comes and he sheds that blood, the purpose of that blood was so it could be used to remove the stain of our willful open rebellion on those altars in the heavenly temple. And you say, I don't believe it. I can take care of it myself. Let me see you try to take your blood and offer it up as a sacrifice to the King of all creation. And he's going to use that to wipe your stain off of. It can't be done. It cannot be done. That's trampling the blood that he sent to atone for you. You reject him, how much worse is it going to be? This is the problem I think that we have in this movement, is sometimes we get so just zealous for stuff, we don't recognize the fact that we're trying to do so many things on our own. And we've got to stop doing that. We're seeing two roles of Yeshua played out in this Torah portion. The high priest role, who atones for the people, and the Avenger of Blood. I will never, ever, ever see this Torah portion ever again the same. And hopefully you guys don't either. Amen? 12:30.